right. So I am going to start talking about Kara, the boring part, very slowly. And then we'll get to the good part in a minute. So for those of you who have never been to a Kara webinar before, welcome. For those of you who are returning, welcome back. I'm Lauren Mancia. I am the director of the Kara board, which includes Carolyn as one of its members. And we're the folks in the Medieval Academy who think about programming for teaching and programming for service work for people who organize medieval studies majors and minors and programs of any kind. So we have a webinar once a month this spring. The one next month is in February, and I'll put the details for that in the chat. And it's about doing public programming from medieval. And then we have another fantastic session that is a sort of smorgasbord of how to lead a medieval studies major, minor, or program of any kind. And that's at the annual meeting in March in Cambridge. And then in April, we're going to have a webinar about leading regional associations for medieval studies. So we've got a lot of fun things in your future, but none is as fun as this one, I would say, which is on experimental archaeology. So I'm just going to introduce our speakers, excuse me, really quickly, and then we'll get started. So let me find my right screen here. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Carolyn Twomey, who's an assistant professor in medieval European history at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and she has a PhD from Boston College. And she's co-edited two books, one, The Meanings of Water in Early Medieval England, and a forthcoming Encounters Early English History in 50 Objects, which might be good for some of us to teach with. So we're looking forward to that. And she also has a forthcoming monograph called Living Water, Living Stone, A Material History of Baptism in Early Medieval England. And then we have a team of scholars from UMBC who are presenting together. Dr. Molly Jones-Lewis is an associate teaching professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and is a social and cultural historian of ancient medicine with a PhD from The Ohio State University. And her research focuses on physicians and their working conditions in the Roman Empire. She's the co-editor of the Rutledge Companion to Identity and the Environment in the Classical and Medieval Worlds, also a book that maybe we can all find useful. And she's preparing a monograph on the doctor in Roman law and society. And Dr. Lindsay Johnson is an associate teaching professor also at UMBC in the music department. And her primary area of research focuses on 17th century Italian nuns and their music through the lens of sacred eroticism and performed embodiment. And she has a PhD from UCLA and is the director of the Medieval and Early Modern Studies minor at UMBC, which is so awesome that they have that. So I'm going to hand it over to Carolyn now. We'll talk for 30 minutes and then we'll take questions and talk together for 30 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm just going to share my screen. Just take a moment. All right, can you see that okay? All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Just a brief warning, if you happen to hear chainsaws in the background, someone is taking down a tree in my backyard, so apologies for any background noise that might interrupt me for a second. I'm going to be talking very briefly today just about two exercises that I do in my survey class at UNL in Nebraska. These are these experiential archaeology exercises that are part of an introductory core course in history. So I like to think that these are assignments and things that can slot into really any class. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I do it. You can see the front cover of the syllabus for this class here. I've taught it over many years, and I incorporate what I call fieldwork exercises into this class. There are 6 across the course of the entire semester, and students participate in all of them, but have to respond to 3 in a short writing assignment. And all of these, what I call field work, sometimes people call these like history labs or out of classroom activities. It gets students out of the classroom, perhaps into the library, doing something physically. And what we kind of use Bloom's taxonomy here that I have on the left, doing something creative, doing learning by doing, and trying applying these other lessons from the classroom, from lectures, from their readings, and really experiencing it in a different way. And so I call these kind of immersive learning, active learning experiences, and they involve metal casting pilgrim's badges. That's the first one I'll talk about. And then one involves some hands-on work with medieval manuscripts. So first off, my pilgrim's badges. Now, this is part of a larger unit on medieval travelers. So we read a bit of Marco Polo, but then we dig into the lives of saints and pilgrims visiting shrines. We can see, in particular, I focus here on Becket, and we have a 3D model of a Becket badge provided by the Digital Pilgrim Project through the British Museum. So the students will look at physical replicas that I have purchased for the class. They will look at these real ones online, and then we will make some ourselves. And then the unit will finish up with readings on academic articles, a short textbook assignment on these kind of particular uses of badges after they are made as well. So they kind of get the whole picture here. Now, metal casting is quite an event. These images are from fall of 2023, my first semester at UNL. And they can be tricky to pull off. We had to move this because of weather to another day in the class, and it's quite a setup. I recommend doing this someplace, in the center of campus, so everyone can kind of see what you're doing. We essentially heat plumber solder over an iron ladle, either over a charcoal or a wood fire, and then you pour it into a mold. This is a replica mold of a Becket badge that was made for me by Lionheart Replicas in the UK. And making these themselves, they have to wear closed-toed shoes and long pants in order to participate. Or in some cases, if they forget, they switch shoes with somebody else so that they can do it. And they get really into it. In a larger class, I have this set up, and each class, this kind of happens during discussion sections. Instead of discussing the text, they'll come and stop by and do this activity together. The materials themselves are fairly simple. You can buy plumber's solder at a local hardware store. And generally, I had a grill already in charcoal that I could bring in. And so this was, a little bit, difficult to set up. We had to go through, fire extinguisher training, on campus. But it was a highly successful student activity. And actually, Dylan, who you can see in this image here, went on to become a major and a really excellent student in my other upper level classes because he was inspired by this activity. These hands-on activities allow students, in my opinion, through that creation, that immersion, to really put themselves in the past and identify with medieval men and women, and really, quite literally makes the past come alive. This is what I get in their feedback from their evaluations and their just general reflections on this activity. The inspiration for this was actually a 2014 Kalamazoo Avista panel, which was an interactive panel led by Steve Walton at Michigan Tech. And Avista is an interdisciplinary arts and science technology group. And they did a fantastic job letting all of us do this. And I got to know how medieval pilgrims and shrines would have produced these badges and exchanged them. And so I became really passionate about putting this into my class. And you can see here the molds, which are either in soapstone or limestone. I've also carved some myself as well. We do this in my Vikings class as well with Thor's hammers. It's a very similar process. Not to take too much time, I'm going to move on. I'm happy to answer questions all about both these activities. The second activity that I do, again, as one of these fieldwork activities, is perhaps an easier one. If it's bad weather, we do this indoors. And this is what I call manuscript week in my introductory survey. We spend the entire kind of class periods, or again, the discussion section portions over 2 weeks, actually learning to write with a quill pen. Um, and I have my students, I don't have them cut the quills or process kind of the raw feather, just for kind of practical considerations, but I know folks who do. And then I pre-make the ink or purchase bottled ink for them to use in the classroom, although I'm considering adding those elements into an upper level class later on. So they spend time trying to write and learning exactly how skilled people in the Dark Ages were before we go into our library, where we are very fortunate to have two 15th century manuscripts that we can see here, a Book of Hours, and then a Roman history here. And so students become immediately impressed with the artistry. They can understand the production, the codicology, the paleography, just on a really deeper level. And this is all part of a unit on the materiality of manuscripts as texts and objects, and the environmental and local processes that went into their creation. We watch a lot of videos on the processing of parchment as well. Um, we spend the time in the library, and then students again will write a response to this activity, which has the added benefit of making a lot of these assignments pretty AI proof, which is something that I've been, as we all have been dealing with recently. And I just want to mention our last image here. I did do an extended version of this activity with another class, and a student decided for their creative component to replicate a copy of a page of the Book of Hours. And she went through and did this all by hand, from pricking and ruling all the way through. So yeah, and she wrote up a very lovely final paper on that. So yeah, it was fascinating. And my interest in this was inspired by participating in a 2021 NEH seminar with Heather Wolf of the Folger Shakespeare Library. This was on the technologies of print, but we also did quite a lot on medieval handwriting and manuscripts. I was able to follow her recommendations and purchase things like quills and parchment from the Scribal Workshop, which is a place in Texas that will happily send you a bushel of quills. So just to conclude, and again, looking forward to chatting more in the Q&A, the pros and cons of this activity: this is very fun. When students are not used to having fun in their history class, this is engaging. One of my students said, it makes me realize that we're just like them on some levels, and really creates this empathy with the past through the making of objects. It's also great because it's flashy and it attracts students on a very practical level. You do this in the middle of the quad. The university photographer comes by, takes some pictures. Suddenly you're the headline of the daily newspaper, and the dean knows your name and says hi. So that's also very nice. And as I mentioned, it's also fairly AI proof. They can't write about something they didn't actually do. And then some of the cons, which I'm sure are quite obvious, is that this costs money, it takes physical space, and it takes time, as well as the support of lots of people on campus. And I'm very fortunate to have had access to grants to support a lot of these activities. And I've also, especially in the early days, spent my own money at the hardware store buying solder. I know that's not going to be possible for a lot of folks. And indeed, I previously did this assignment in a small liberal arts college. And now, in moving it to a large state institution, it can be more challenging. You have more students. You have a lot more paperwork if you want to have a fire on campus, it turns out. And so I'm still kind of learning how to adjust and how to make this something that flourishes in this institution as well. So I will end there. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to chatting.
We'll turn it over to Lindsay and Molly.
All righty. Let me fire this up. And here we go. So, our framing question for this class, which we were very lucky to have funded through a generous grant from the Habrowski Fund, which is named after a former president, and it gives you seed money to develop new and unusual pedagogies. So after doing this low key in different classes over the years, we got together and decided to offer it as a standalone class during summer last year. And our framing question was, what can we learn by doing? Especially, what can we learn by doing that we don't learn through traditional pedagogy? And these are some of our notes and lessons learned. So bird's eye view of this. This is our first cohort of experimental archaeology students. We're offering it again this summer, and we're hoping to make the G program here at UMBC. And as Lauren mentioned, I'm from Ancient Studies, which is our version of classics in archaeology, and Lindsay is from the music department. So this is an unusually interdisciplinary approach. We met in a band. I play in Collegium, and I'm so glad Lindsay let me play in Collegium. So
We have a
here
recorder band.
is, yes, my two majors in college were early music performance recorder and classics. I sold out, I'm so sorry. So here, let's see, I can't see my title behind the interface. First bit of advice, you are a fellow pilgrim on an adventure. You are not the end-all be-all expert who knows everything. Modeling being curious and willing to fail can be an incredibly transformative experience for your students, many of whom have never been allowed to be imperfect in a learning environment and are super, super anxious about it. So one of the best things that we were surprised that we were able to offer our first cohort is a renewed sense of adventure and learning without shame and fear. But you do want to lean into your special interests. One of the things I do on the side, I'm a fiber artist. I spin and weave. So I incorporated that into our activities. Here's Dr. Johnson teaching cooking on our cooking day. And this included a family recipe that she researched and used as a teaching opportunity for our students. And here they are experiencing recorders for the first time. It was really a magical experience. And Lindsay and I will be handing off, so it's your turn.
Ah, all right. Are you going to go to the next slide?
I did.
Oh, you did? It hasn't yet.
I did. It should be.
Oh,
Oh,
all right.
dear.
Ah, here we go.
Are there fires yet?
Yes,
Ah,
the fires
yes.
are up now. I want to echo Dr. Twomey. Sorry, I didn't. I'd like to echo
Thank you. Yeah.
Twomey. I'd like to echo Dr. Twomey's perhaps not irritation, but mentioning how many hoops you have to jump through to do dangerous things on campus. We also had to take fire extinguisher training. We had the fire marshal come out this day we built the fire, and he stood around and watched us for a long time, and then he left while we were still burning something, so I figured we were doing all right. He left a fire extinguisher just in case. But we taught fire building skills. And what they're doing here in this picture, they're learning how to use charcoal and blowing through a reed to hollow out a bit of board to make a spoon, or if you did it on a larger scale, a small boat. So they were working on this kind of very early and also indigenous method of woodworking. And that same day, we also did projectiles because one danger was not enough. We needed to do two. And I taught archery, and we had a couple different kinds of bows and arrows. And so folks, we didn't have too many. I just brought all the ones I had. and Molly brought one of hers. And so we kind of traded off. I took small groups to come and do the archery. But as we wrote in here, it's a bit of a pain to try to do this. So you got to start early. And we went through so many different entities on campus to try to figure out who we needed to talk with to know if we could build a fire and how to do that and where we could do that. This is on a far corner of campus, and when we were done, we put the grass back on the hole we had made. So you probably can't even see that it's there now. We're going to do it again this year, but it worked out really well. The students were just absolutely thrilled that they could learn fire building techniques. Could you go to the next slide?
I think this one is mine. Can you
Oh,
see
is
the
it?
bees?
Oh, okay. I can't see the bees yet. No. I think your internet's a little
Give it a
wobbly.
minute. And
Okay.
silly internet. Well, soon you will see bees and the campus garden space. Next bit of advice is you're going to have to get resourceful, but the staff and facilities and groundskeeping personnel on your campus are your secret weapon. Not only do they know things, but they became some of our biggest cheerleaders. And it turns out our campus has a beekeeper. Who knew? Who took over an entire class for us and taught our students how to do beekeeping with our on-campus beehive. And we were later able to get some of our campus honey to make local products from scratch, which was delightful. No mead. That probably would have been another permit. The campus garden space was greatly dilapidated. We had to talk a groundskeeper into bringing us soil, which she did, bless her. And we spent a lot of time digging in the dirt to put in our experimental Three Sisters garden. It works, is the spoiler. Especially if you get fish from H Mart. H Mart was our unofficial sponsor for surprising amounts of this class. So make friends outside of faculty, and you're going to find some of your best cheerleaders, and they're going to take the weight off of you.
Our staff.
And there's a new slide coming for this eventually. Or staff. Staff are magic, and they're so helpful. But you are going to have to prepare to do some peasant labor, invest in good pants with lots of pockets, which is what I'm going to spend some of my personal development money on for next summer. We talked to several campus stakeholders and found out which species were invasive and fine for us to cut down and use. There's a bit of campus that's also an open air ecology lab where they were glad for us to come and forage and use things. We found a secret food forest somebody had planted and then not done much with, but it made great fruit preserves, and we were able to forage ingredients for our cooking day there. So we had great return on our physical investment, but for many of our teaching days, Dr. Johnson and I were showing up in the morning and laboring in the fields to prepare for our 3-hour-long class meeting. So this could get very physical.
Yes.
Back to you, Lindsay.
The logistics, the physical logistics of this class was the hardest hurdle we had. I mean, we did a lot of pre-prep work before the summer semester started, talking with people and working with campus stakeholders. But in the day-to-day, it was the physical logistics. I had a wagon that I just carted, or we dragged this wagon all over the place. It had our knives, it had our branches, it had our bits of wool and books and all kinds of things that we just carted everything with us. One thing that we didn't plan for, but we realized it as we were moving forward, was how sensory rich these pedagogical tools we were using were, and how memorable that sensory richness is for students and how engaging on a different level. And we also realized that because of this emphasis on the different senses and on what experiences the students bring from their own lives and their memories and their bodily memories, that this was a really useful set of pedagogies for neurodivergent students, for students who maybe had had trouble in other areas of academia through learning disabilities, etc. This was a way that they could really get into a research methodology that was completely different from what they had experienced and perhaps struggled with in the past. And they just bloomed here. And we we have a kind of montage here of these images, but we did things where we tasted, we made foods, we pickled, we did the honey fermentation of berries with our campus honey. Um, we have some honeycomb there to taste. We did a lot of feeling and smelling. The day we did the baskets, that was one of the first days. One of our students had gone to get some more of the Phragmites, I believe, and came back with a cattail. And we were looking at it, and we actually didn't recognize it at first, but we came to the conclusion that it was a cattail, and we were right. But we were going through it, and we were picking it apart and feeling the gel inside of it, and feeling it on our skin and thinking, wow, I bet this could be used for this. And we were right, like it's antibacterial. And we were trying to think, what kinds of things could we do with this leaf that we're looking really closely at, and we're sniffing and we're feeling. And we saw a lot of nature. We saw the snake. We saw deer all the time. And one other sensory rich thing we have in here, one of our students spent much of the project time working on garum. So this is the beginning stages where the H-mart mackerel and salt are in a container. And this student kept the fermenting fish out in the courtyard for 30 days and stirred it daily, and we just watched the fish liquefy. But that was definitely a sensory rich experience. All right, you could go on, Molly.
And their research question was contextualizing the penetrating and distinctive odor of garum into Roman law, where one of our earliest zoning laws is about not making garum too close to where people need to live. And we realized very quickly why.
They're right.
When the slide updates, I'm going to move on to our next best decision that we thanked ourselves for over and over and are again, is we thought early and often about free publicity and outreach. We had an Instagram for the class, and through our class Discord, we had students submit pictures that we would then feature at the very least, after every day's class meeting. I'd put together a reel, and then I'd put some cool medieval music with the reel, and students' family, like somebody's grandma, was following us avidly and commenting on it. It built a lot of support at home, and also allowed us to make contact with people who are much, much more experienced in applied experimental archaeology than we are, who were able to offer us suggestions and ideas. And it's just wonderful on that level. And our QR code is there if you want to find us on the Instagram. But we also reached out to campus publicity, and we had a feature in our campus magazine. And we tried to be really good about taking pictures as we were going, which can be difficult when you're teaching, because when you're teaching, you're teaching. And teaching and taking pictures are two things, and that can be hard for attention splitting, but your students with a little encouragement are more than willing to help you with this, and that is a great thing to leverage. Okay, back to you, Lindsay. It's the start to finish manuscript. slide.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really tried to focus on the most was taking a project through from beginning to end. And we only had 6 students. It was a summer class. There were 2 of us. That made it a lot easier. I know that Dr. Twomey was saying how with a big class you can only do so much, but we made the ink with the iron gall. There's a picture a little later with the mortar and pestle for that. We made the ink. Everyone got a bush knife and a spindle as part of their just course materials. So everyone had their knives out, and we tried a number of different types of writing implements. Actually, we had feathers, we had quills. They also tried cattail. Cattail does not work. The Phragmites reeds worked very well, though. So we tried a number of different writing tools, different types of cuts. We made the ink, and then we had them try out different manuscripts and different types of writing. So we went, and then actually we had them make thank you notes using their pens and the ink we made for the folks who had come in, like the beekeeper. We had them write thank you notes in a rather hilarious script. So we were trying as much as possible to do these start to finish. So with the wool production, we started out, the first thing we did in the class actually was wash some of the wool, the raw wool with soapwort, and we went all the way through carding and all the way through spinning and then processing the spun yarn by whacking it. That's about as, oh, and then some people started weaving. So we went all the way from the beginning to the end. And that was a really useful way to conceptualize all the different steps that go into any kind of production. And then some of our students used that methodology in their final projects. So one person did a project on tempera paint and made a number of different paint recipes to try things out and different additives, for example. Could you go to the next slide? I don't remember what the
So
next
I'm going to move quickly because
we're
I know
running.
time.
Yeah.
With this chain of production too, we were able to give a lot of foundational skills that students could then go off on their own and develop further. I'm showing day 1 here where they're learning to comb wool and do basic basket twining. I first taught twining around a very bad wattle fence that did not stay up. Not my best work, but it showed them what twining was well enough that they were able to move on in some amazing directions. And here are a few of the end products. Students weaving, our butter that didn't quite butter because it was too warm. I have another student who spun an entire ball of yarn, their first yarn ever. And one of the students was really interested in the Bayou tapestry and ended up making a memorial embroidery piece that they tried to weave the ground for and didn't quite manage, but it allowed them to get behind, like, how do we memorialize with embroidery as a medium? So just very quickly, in order to put this class together in a way that didn't feel like a clip show, we used the agricultural year as a way of making this a readable calendar. And here's what we called each week, rather like fallow math and midsummer for our celebration unit. And we also thought widely about experiments. Some of our experiments were about song and memory and social organization. So we thought rather broadly about what is an experiment. And our final celebration, where students presented their capstones to the community in a living history day, we called the harvest. Sounds ominous, but it was fun. And then I'll gloss over this. These are the projects that our students chose for their independent capstone research. We had rush lights, pharmaceutical compounding, fish sauce, and paint was fantastic. Somebody else did a multi-century retrospective on vinegar-based drinks from the Roman Empire to 18th century Maryland, which was also delightful.
Mhm.
So some final lessons learned and thoughts moving ahead. The anti-perfectionism piece is important. Not only do you need to make mistakes, but you need to make them obviously and then frame the process by which one recovers from the mistakes. It's good for you, it's good for them. We all need some of this in our lives. We wish we had had them pick their capstone project earlier. The 6-week format is not very long. Next time we're teaching it on an 8-week calendar, but we are going to have them pick something so they have enough time to do a project that feels satisfying and complete to them. However, a lot of them kept working on them after the end of the course and updated their friends on Discord, which was just, that's what we want, is we want them to go out and do this some more on their spare time, and they did. Which brings me to incentivizing adventure. We wanted this in part because it was a summer class. We weren't looking to do rigor in the traditional sense. What we wanted to do was to get them intrinsically motivated to go out and do this a lot for fun. And I think that we succeeded in pretty darn well. So leaning into joy, and Carolyn was mentioning this too, is an important pedagogical tool and a refreshing leavening to traditional university teaching. There is institutional support out there. Look early and look often for it. Our Habrowski grant was instrumental, and we're going to look for the next level of grant as we continue to develop this as a program. Here's some student feedback. This is our student Halima, who's now going on to an internship at the Folger Library. So she is gone from this experience into more medieval studies, and we've seen that with other students as well. I'll just end us on her last comment. Before this class, I'd never left the comfort of my room, and the only research I knew was JSTOR. This type of research methodology that I learned will now allow me to do research on my own without being afraid. When I learn something new about history, I can imagine it. When I hear about women weaving, I can now feel it. So this brings together everything we hoped and dreamed for this course, a real full body approach to being a researcher in history and medieval studies. And one of our students made this as an ad for our community day. So what can we learn by doing? Everything, but primarily joy. And joy is an underappreciated essential of a scholarly life. So thank you so much for your time.
Amazing. Pamela Smith and I both posted about the Making and Knowing project at the same time in the chat. That's another resource. I've been like extracting some of the resources that people are mentioning as we talk, and I will continue to do that as we have our Q&A. So if you have led a course or a learning module in this way, please feel free to tell us about it. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you. So Pamela has her hand up. Is it possible in this format for her to unmute? I just want to make sure that that's true. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, what are you trying to do?
Can an attendee speak?
Yeah, let me find her.
Okay, great. Pamela Smith, her hand is up. There she is. Great.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't think I can turn on my video, but that's okay. Doesn't matter. This was great. I mean, so many things resonate. I mean, the exact, kinds of challenges and potential and student excitement, etc. But I did just want, I posted it in the chat because the Making and Knowing project has just launched its research and teaching companion, which contains thoughts about hands-on work, all of our resources from creating the digital critical edition of this amazing artisanal manuscript, MSFR 640, and lesson plans. So all the lesson plans contain, course objectives and student assignments and instructor information and instructor resources for learning how to do things. And then we have all of, all the sample student projects that were fit to put up on this site as examples of the kinds of projects that you can do. So I really hope that this resource is widely used and is useful to people. And that's exactly the same kind of effort. I really want to try to insert and hands-on work into the really text-heavy regime of students, and to make them feel good about their learning and about failure and about working on their own and figuring things out for themselves. So I really, if you use the teaching companion, by all means, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pamela. We have another question from Flannery McIntyre. He's a musicologist with a background in archaeology, so they're interested if Lindsay and Molly incorporated any experimental music archaeology into their courses.
Yes, we did. We had a week on music and dance, actually. I have a number of early instruments in my office because I lead the collegium here. So I lead the early music ensemble. And so I took my wagon down with the recorders and the rackets and the crumb horns, and I took a bunch of instruments down, and string instruments. We have viola da gamba, we have all kinds of things. And I let them try them out. I introduced each one. We talked about kind of how they might have been used in the time, and then we let them try them out. And we did a little chanting as well. We sang some chant, and we also did some Renaissance dances. So I have a Renaissance dance day I do in my music history course, my early music history course. We always do a Renaissance dance workshop. So I just incorporated all that material, moved it over to this day. And I think it's really fun with dance, at least, especially because you can think about how your body's moving in space, and kind of think about, just like other types of hands-on things, how your body's moving in relation to how historical bodies might have been moving. So yes, absolutely, we did.
Molly.
To add to that, we unofficially attended a local powwow that was held on private land by a local group of Indigenous people. And next summer, we plan to make that an official part of the curriculum, because it was such a rich experience for those of us who could make it. So we're trying to make this more global in its scope, and that's our next step.
Other questions, comments, suggestions from the audience? Pamela, go for it.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes, we just invited dyers, Purépecha speaking dyers from Mexico to lead a dyeing residency. We got funding from a foundation for that. And that too, it was so wonderful. I mean, trying to really show the students how much knowledge there is out in the world. Just like you said, you've just started to make it more global. So yeah, for those of you close to Mexico, there are so many possibilities of working with people there.
Other, Jamie Craner. Chris, can you unmute Jamie? Thank you. Jamie, I think you're live. Yes.
Thank you so much. And thanks to the presenters for sharing the kind of bureaucracy involved in this, and and I mean, manual labor, and also like just talking to everyone who works at your institutions. I'm also curious about the kind of research involved. We all have our areas of specialization, but the examples you've given in both of these courses are pretty wide ranging. And so I imagine that you had to do a ton of work in advance just to even like build these either modules into the syllabus or the entire syllabus, just because it's a huge range of work and forms of production. And I'm curious how you did that and how long it took.
If I guess I could start and jump in there. Thank you for your question. When I first started implementing these kind of hands-on activities and experiential archaeology group things, I was the only person teaching any European history whatsoever. So I was the Plato to NATO person. And so I had to catch up with a lot of stuff, and I just chose what I wanted to focus my energies on. Everything, creating a syllabus is all about those hard decisions. And so I, led with what I was interested in, and led with certain themes that I was already working on in my own, specialty. So we did a lot when thinking about pilgrimage and travel and history of religion, which is what I work on. But then also I've done work with Renaissance letter locking, but I only did that myself and was inspired to turn that into an assignment because I did an NEH seminar in which I was taught how to do it. And so that month-long seminar provided me with just an excellent, half of a course that I could easily turn into something that students could do as well. So it's just about taking, I think, these little things and going to those experiential archaeology panels at conferences and seeing what you can take from. But it is complex. I had to do a lot of research one semester because I wanted my students to bake Roman bread. And I knew nothing about, cooking modern or pre-modern. And so I needed to, really, and the bread was terrible and we didn't really should not have eaten it. We made 16th century hot chocolate. And so, a lot of the early modern stuff, I did have to do a lot of digging into, but in an introductory class as well, I've done this mostly with intro students. And so they haven't done their own projects in depth, such as, my colleagues here, but that's kind of another step. So anyway, thank you for your question. Hope I answered it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One of the resources worth tapping is your local Society for Creative Anachronisms group. They have a wealth of lived experience as crafters and can frequently, especially these days, point you to pretty reputable sources. I was a dorky autistic teen, so I've been doing this for years, but that is where I learned a lot of the skills that I've been able to leverage for this. And we're lucky in Maryland to have a very active handcrafting scene in general. So local festivals and information centers. We have a local Indigenous Culture Museum that does craft tutorial nights. So if you can get plugged into the right people, that can be an incredible resource. And you do it like anything, one skill at a time, skill by skill, and get used to being bad at it.
I would also say don't be afraid to just jump in and try whatever you want to do, because as we said before, failure is so valuable in this process. And I mean, we were teaching basketry. We're not basket makers. We were doing a lot of,
taken one class
this
at
is how I
4-H
think it
camp.
goes. Yeah. Let's try this out. Oh, this works better. And the nice thing about that is that the students also then can put in their opinion. Oh, well, what if we try this? This is kind of like this other thing I've done. And then they can help with the knowledge building. And that gives them a sense of agency as well. And it feels much more collaborative. So if you don't feel like you're an expert, try it anyway. And you'll learn and you'll get better at it. And then you'll be more of an expert than the students. But it's okay to start out being just a little bit better at it than the students, and they love the opportunity to help get in the weeds and troubleshoot, because that's what we want to be offering to them.
Other questions, comments? I think just to build on what everyone is saying, also there are so many untapped resources on your campus that come out of the woodwork when they start seeing you making fire on campus or whatever, right? Where all of a sudden the, local chair of the creative anachronism chapter or whatever, it happens to work at the circulation desk at the library or whatever. So then incorporating that, and then Nancy Wicker had mentioned in the chat, right, that in the anthro department, in the art history department, you have people who have these more practical skills, either for campus resources or for sort of curricula about experimental archaeology. Karen Jolly, Chris, can you unmute Karen? Karen, I see you unmuted, but we do not hear you.
Okay, aloha. Can I turn my camera off? I don't know. So just first of all, thank you so much to Carolyn and Molly and sorry, I'm blanking out on names here, and Lindsay. So this is maybe a good segue to the next Cara session, but I'm starting this afternoon a class that is only tapping into a little bit of what you've been talking about today. I'm looking at replicas for Iona, the island, and Iona Islands of the North Atlantic. So I'm busily bagging replicas here in my office to take to class for hands-on experiences. But I am so overwhelmed and impressed with what everyone has been doing in these classes with experimental archaeology. We're going to try and get to that with some of the voyaging techniques, but we're doing it from an Oceanian perspective. So next month, in my session, I don't have any results. It's more aspirational, but trying to figure out how students and the community can come together in various and sundry ways. So if I look at agricultural rituals, there's a stone healing set of stones in Waikiki that have been restored, and can students touch and look at those and come back in and think about early medieval stone artifacts. So but I feel like I'm just taking baby steps this semester compared to what you all have been doing already. And I would echo then that it takes a huge amount of planning ahead of time, which I haven't done yet. So anyway, thank you so much. And I hope to see you next month in our session.
Thank you, Karen. We have two more questions that came in. One from Holly saying, I've been trying to develop a 16-week course focusing on late antique craft work and embodied learning largely on my own. It is a phenomenal amount of work, which clearly benefits from conversations with a colleague. Do you have any suggestions for a professor who might be in a very small department and one of the only ancient historians at the university?
I'll take this one as well. I'm now at a very large institution. I was at a very small one, and so I would reach out to folks in not necessarily pre-modernists either, but folks in religious studies and in our anthro department. So one of our archaeology folks had done some activities like that before, and so I was able to bounce ideas off of her. As well as get to know other people on campus, staff as well, that might be able to support this. So I always appreciate, the opportunity to bounce ideas off other medievalists as well, but, I didn't have that certainly. And so by going to some colleagues that, even if they weren't doing some of these activities themselves, but they, had thoughts about it, I could, have a conversation about both my goals for the assignment as well as the practicalities of doing it. This is really collaborative, and I would not have been able to do any of these or all the activities that I do without many people at my institution and without, which is why, I am really willing to chat to anybody, in listening now or listening, on YouTube or whatever in the future about sharing assignments, sharing conversations with this. And I think that these types of forums are also really good for that too.
Amazing. And I just want to ask one last question here from Catherine Rose, who says, have you had any issues publishing your findings? Have scholars been receptive and positive to your findings and processes? Silence.
I don't mind starting this one. I was shocked by how much people wanted me to share this. This isn't my primary research stream, but I had shared on Facebook before this class kicked off. I was doing a DIY experiment in Roman wool processing using human urine. I'm so sorry of all the things. But it is now published through the Society of Classical Studies blog, and I'm working on an experimental archaeology publication, in part because my colleagues wanted to have it to cite it, which was a bit of a shock to me because I've gotten social feedback from colleagues in my field before that's been like, oh, you do crafts. But I think the tide is turning and there's more respect for this sort of experiential learning. If there's anything good about the rise of AI, it's that people are beginning to appreciate touching grass and doing things yourself. And a lot of that we owe, by the way, to our colleagues in Europe who have been doing experimental archaeology and fighting to make it an accepted and respected methodology for years before we ever showed up.
Thank you. And I'll just add that I've not explored opportunities to publish these materials because, as was mentioned, this is not necessarily my research area. However, I have been, approached about publishing these things, and there's lots, as Lauren put into the chat, there's lots of different ways in which you can publish this material, and it's something I would consider. So.
Well, we are just at the end of our hour-long session, so I just want to thank you all again for speaking to us about these fantastic classes you've been teaching. Thank our audience for sharing things with us and for talking with us about this. Thank Chris for helping us get this off the ground and online. As I mentioned in the chat, this recording will be available on YouTube soon, so you can have it forevermore. And I hope that you join us next month when Karen and others will be talking about public programming, which has actually a little bit of a connection to this discussion too. So fruitful off-campus alliances for your on-campus medieval classroom. So thanks so much again, everybody, and good luck going back to school if you're not there already. Bye.